everyone, and welcome to the Ultimate Job Search and Career Podcast with me, Bill, the company's expert. And have I got a treat in store for you today on this episode? If you have ever been rejected for a job, and if you've ever had an issue with the job search process and the job selection process and how they assess candidates and how they select someone, well, you've come to the right place. I think you'll be able to relate to this episode because on this episode, we're talking about the stupidity of the selection process and what to do about it. Now, I feel that I very rarely rant. I try and do videos where I give information. It's almost like a how-to format where I give advice on what to do about something. I've never really gone in for YouTube videos where people do reactions. You know, it's not really informative. It's just sort of entertainment. But today's episode is probably the closest I'm ever going to get to a rant because I'm going to take apart how they do recruitment and selection and a lot of the flaws with it and what you can do about it. I have taught this stuff at universities. I have taught recruiters in universities, in HR programs, within business programs. And I've been a hiring manager myself. I've hired a lot of people. I've had to fire a few people. I've been raised through the ranks of an organization from worker to supervisor to manager to executive to CEO. I've never been a board member, but I don't know. I'm still young. But I believe I can shed light on this. And I think this is an easy target because generally speaking, job search and recruitment and selection is so bad, has such a bad track record of being ineffective that this is almost too easy. So let's get into this. Now, let's figure out what is wrong with the job search process, with the way that organizations assess candidates and make selections, okay? Now, I'm going to look at several reasons why organizations tend to reject candidates. And if this has happened to you, you will know exactly what I'm talking about here. Okay? For a start, recruiters and hiring managers, especially recruiters, they tend to be easily swayed by good looks, articulateness, and charisma. Have you ever noticed this? The people that look fantastic and sound fantastic, the ones who dress fantastic, the ones that are very likable, they've got the $1 million smile. Do you ever notice how they are selected out of all proportionality? Well, this is a well-known trait. This is actually studied in HR of how these people tend to be believed, shall we say. They tend to get selected and they make the best first impressions. Now, this is not something unique to HR. This actually comes from sales, from marketing in particular, where people have studied this in depth. People with far greater qualifications than I, people with PhDs in several areas, ranging from psychology to sociology, to business, to even medicine, have studied this effect because, you know, people tend to be swayed by people who are good looking, articulate, and charismatic. That's just the bottom line. And so one would think that with all of the intelligence behind a lot of organizations, especially large organizations, that they would have put policies into place and put controls into place to ensure that the candidates that they select are of the highest quality and they are not biased by these things. Unfortunately, that is not the case. There are some great recruiters out there. However, a lot of them are not great, shall we say. They are easily influenced by this. They are incapable of spotting this and having the self-awareness to see this. And so as a result, they overlook a lot of qualified candidates, a lot of good candidates that would end up being good employees that don't look like Hollywood, superstars or fashion models, that don't have the $1 million smile, that don't have, the gift of gab, shall we say, and it's a well-known fact that a lot of technical people, a lot of people with attention to detail, that can work miracles when it comes to things like operations and have incredible skills may not be the most good-looking, articulate, and charismatic people around. For many, many years, Bill Gates was the richest man in the world, the richest human. And if you look at that guy, do you think anyone would have selected him in a job interview, a standard job interview where he was an unknown? Of course not. He looks like a geek. He talks like a nerd. He has no fashion sense. And he does not make a great first impression. The only reason that people flock to hear his keynote speeches and hang off his every word, and I myself have seen him live and gone to events where he was speaking, is because of his accomplishments. Unfortunately, in a job interview, you can't show your accomplishments in the vast majority of cases. A lot of accomplishments are not visual. There may be exceptions for people that do graphic design and things like that and art, but for regular people, you can't visualize this in a job interview. You have to talk about how great you are. And if they just don't believe you, you don't get the job. Isn't that fun? This is a well-known bias. This is studied in HR, and despite that, most recruiters fall victim to it. Okay? It's ridiculous. They miss out on a huge pool of talent. Okay, another thing I like to take issue with here with recruiters and hiring managers, some hiring managers that fall into this category, okay, they don't appreciate generalists. This is the conventional wisdom. If you are applying for a job, a posted job, and you go through the standard recruitment process where you send in a job application in response to a posted job ad, and then if you're lucky, you get to talk to an interviewer. And then if you're lucky, you get to talk to another interviewer. And then if you're lucky, you get an offer. Okay. They tend to not appreciate generalists. In order to make it through that process, you have to be an exact match for the job. In order to get an interview, that certainly is the case. And in order to pass the interviews from a technical perspective, they would want that you have dedicated your entire life to preparing yourself for this job. And 99% of the time, that's just not the case. Nor is it reasonable to expect that. You're going to have done other things. You're going to have general skills. And the other thing is that when they assess candidates, a common complaint is that recruiters and hiring managers, especially recruiters, they place, shall we say, skewed importance on skills that directly relate to the duties of the job. And they don't place any importance on things that do not directly relate to your job duties. Now, this is a hard thing to convince people that is wrong, because in order to see how wrong this is, you have to have lived in the world for quite a few years. You have to have seen actual jobs, many different industries, and this will become clear that general skills are very, very useful, much more useful than recruiters seem to think. If you have skills in one area and you've seen a problem solved in a particular area, but then you get a job in a different area and you see people in this area struggling with problems that you have seen already solved in a different area, you can easily transplant the solution for that. This will never happen if the only people you ever hire are people that have done this one menial job their entire lives and have never seen anything else. There is a value to experience, and there is a value to broad experience. This is something that is completely lost in practice in the recruitment and selection process in many, many organizations and with many, many individuals that work in those organizations that make these decisions. This is an extraordinary opportunity that is lost. And it's a fallacy of thinking. And that's going to be the theme of a lot of the things I'm going to take issue with. A lot of the selection process is based on making assumptions. Assumptions about you. They're going to draw conclusions about who you are based on some of the most superficial, flimsy, ridiculous traits. Let's get into it. Now, when we look at why a lot of recruiters reject candidates in the selection process, okay? Let's look at the things that they're aware of. Okay, not the biases and things that they're unaware of, because a lot of times they're unaware of how bad they are at their job at making selection. Now, in all fairness, spotting talent is hard, but I feel that the way recruitment and selection is handled is that we amplify this. We amplify it by taking people, in a lot of cases, people that don't have experience with other elements of an organization, and get those people to make decisions about who would be good in those other elements of an organization. It's done very poorly. Now, let's just look at, within a job interview, the things that often get you eliminated, okay? Number one, and I love this one, because this is the first of four things that are just, in my opinion, very, very flimsy. They didn't want the job. A recruiter will interview you, and they may draw the conclusion that, oh, this candidate doesn't really want the job. Now, based on that, they will reject a candidate. Now, my question is, how do they make this determination? A lot of the job interview process, it seems to be geared around very intuitive individuals. Not everybody is intuitive. In fact, speaking for myself, being more of what I consider to be a technical person, I have an engineering degree and I've worked with technicians for many years. Those types of people generally do not have great intuition. They don't seem to be very intuitive. They tend to be very explicit when they communicate. They explicitly say everything they mean. They don't just skip to the end of the story and just assume you know what they're talking about, right? Now, I'm not beating up on people who are intuitive. There are many of those people, and it can be an incredible gift and an incredible skill. However, if you look at the playbook of how recruiters assess candidates in job interviews, this comes up, okay? A requirement of getting the job, which is often unspoken, is that you will be passionate for the job. And more than that, you have to show that you're passionate for the job. If you don't realize this, even though nobody told you this, if you don't realize this, when you go into the job, you could want that job a lot. And I'm not talking about you're desperate for a job. I'm talking about you want that job specifically more than any other. You feel that that job would be perfect for you, and you're really hoping that they'll select you, okay? Now, let's say this is how you feel, but let's pretend you're the type of person that doesn't show a lot of emotion, okay? How can I put this? You don't wear your emotions on your sleeve. They can't tell by looking at your face what you're passionate about, what you don't like, what you really like, what's going on with you. They can't read you like an open book. One would say you are a good negotiator, because this is something that you require in negotiation. If you are a poker player, you'll know what I'm talking about. You have the poker face, right? And you're not supposed to show when you're elated that you've got all the good cards, or you're terribly panicked that you have all the bad cards. You have this stone-faced look on you, and you don't radiate a lot of emotion. People can't read you. Now, the playbook for HR says that if you sense that the candidate isn't really passionate about the job, that will get them eliminated right there and then. Isn't this lovely? It's these kind of mind games that really annoy a lot of people, because this was never explained to them. Okay, if you want to pass this test, you have to give indications that you are passionate about this specific job. It just comes down to that. Now, my heart goes out to all those people that are incredible employees. They're very hardworking, very talented, very disciplined, and they have a love for their job. They love what they do and they want to do it, and they're good at it. But they fail the job selection process because they're not highly, highly emotional, and they don't give outward appearances of being passionate about something. If that's you, my friend, are at a natural disadvantage, and you have to learn to overcome this. It's really not that hard once you know the problem exists, but it's the frustration of not realizing that all these little things are going on in the interview, especially as a technical person or as a more introverted person, of realizing there's this whole overcurrent of things happening in the job interview. They're reading things about you that, number one, you would think shouldn't be a factor. And number two, you don't understand, even if you realize it's a factor, you feel you don't realize it's going on. So once you realize this, you can overcome it. But this is the stupidest reason, in my opinion, to eliminate someone from the job. Okay? Recruiters generally are not trained as therapists. They are not trained to be able to read emotions. They have never had any training on that. But yet, they feel that they're an authority to eliminate somebody based on this. Okay? Now, I understand why it's done this way. And there are reasons for it to be done this way, practical reasons. You can't select everyone. You can only select one person, and this is a factor. But this is the stupidest reason to overlook and reject a candidate that could turn out to be brilliant. That's all I want to say. We need to get better collectively at selecting the right people and not using criteria like this as the basis for assumptions. That's what I want to say about that. Okay. Now, some other reasons why candidates get rejected in interviews. Well, one thing, and this maybe will come with age for very young people that don't realize this. This is something that sooner or later you will realize, okay? If you say something bad about anybody in a job interview, a lot of times that will get you eliminated on the spot. Okay? If they bait you with questions where they ask you things like, what was the thing that you hated the most about your previous boss? Or what was a negative point about working with some of the coworkers you worked with in the past? Or what's the most annoying aspect of dealing with customers? Okay, they'll bait you with these types of questions. And then if you walk into this trap and say, oh yeah, my previous boss was an idiot, or, I hate dealing with customers. It's really tedious, especially the stupid ones. You answer their question, you give them what they were probing for. Your big reward is they eliminate you. It's ridiculous. Now, once again, the reason for this is because they're following a playbook that makes assumptions. And they're saying, okay, if this candidate is bad-mouthing a previous employer, previous boss, previous coworkers, or customers in general, then they're probably a very negative person that will badmouth us if we hire them. They'll be complaining about our customers and our managers and their own boss at this company if we hire them. Okay? They're making that assumption about you. And in a way, this is a little bit of entrapment because, they're the ones that are directly asking you about it. And you're just being accommodating and giving them what they were asking for. And your big reward is that they reject you for being accommodating. Now, this is how a lot of people think. This is how a lot of the more innocent younger people think who have never been trained on job interviews. They walk into the job interview and then bam, they get eliminated with this seemingly harmless question. You asked me for this. I answered it. I gave you what you were asking for. So I should have passed, right? Not so. And it's this kind of, once again, this is another example of I wouldn't describe it as mind games, but I understand people who describe it as mind games because it is. It is. They're trying to probe, they're trying to learn about you without taking the time to learn about you. That's the problem with this process. Now, another reason why they would eliminate a candidate in an interview, okay, is maybe you don't give short, concise answers. Okay, you ramble. You give lengthy answers that go on forever. Now, hello, I've got a podcast. I tend to do this. This is how I talk. I'm a very talkative person, especially when you get me going on a subject that I have knowledge and opinions on. And I'm like a lot of human beings in that respect. Once you get us going on something that we enjoy talking about and we have an opinion on, and we are passionate about, we tend to talk at length. Now, once again, this is totally biased against people who don't have A+ social skills. Okay? A lot of introverts out there, a lot of technical people out there, this is biased against you. Okay? If you're a technical person, let's say you're an engineer, let's say you're a technician, let's say you're a construction worker, let's say you're a master builder, let's say you're a manager who manages a certain product or provides a certain service that you've been doing for 20 years. And somebody asks you, tell me about that product or that service. I see here you've been an industrial electrician for 20 years, and then they ask you some questions about being an industrial electrician, what's going on in that world, in that industry, and the changes that have come in and things like this. And you decide to, you get into it. You're invested in this topic. So you go on at length. Now, unbeknownst to you, the recruiter who asked you this question, they are absolutely not interested in the world of being an industrial electrician. And so you go on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes about being an industrial electrician. And in their minds, oh, okay, this person is rambling. This person, is just, they're not self-aware. They don't realize that I'm not really into this. And they don't want to talk about being an industrial electrician. They were hoping you would kind of say maybe 10 seconds, give a nice 10-second answer, and then end your answer, and then they can move on. But no, they struck upon something that you were interested in and you were passionate about and you have opinions on and you have experiences with. And so you go on at length. And because they're not interested in hearing about it, even though they asked about it, they eliminate you. Isn't that ridiculous? See, it's this kind of thing that, results in, I'm not complaining about, people not being hired because, once again, you can only hire one person for each job. You can't hire every candidate. But what I am saying is that you are rejecting great candidates on the basis of these principles, which are silly, which are flawed. And they enable a huge blind spot where you can't see talent by making decisions based on stuff like this. Okay? So that's ridiculous, in my opinion. Eliminating somebody because they ramble and eliminating somebody because they go on at length, maybe that's just passion, Now, if you're going for an executive job, this is where, okay, I could see this might be more of a valid reason. An executive has to have very advanced communication skills. They have to be very self-aware and things like this. But for the vast majority of jobs, it's like if you're working in a warehouse, you're stacking boxes in a warehouse, or you're working as a plumber, this stuff, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't, That's all I'll say about that. Okay. Another reason why people might get eliminated in a job interview, and I'm talking generalities here, is that they couldn't get specific enough. Now, I've heard this said from several sources. People, they're not specific enough. A recruiter will probe. They will ask questions in a job interview. And, a lot of times recruiters will not have the technical background in whatever position that they're hiring for. So let's say they're hiring for a technical position, or let's say that they're hiring for, let's take something neutral, like maybe sales. They're looking for a salesperson. Okay. Now, they ask a series of questions in the interview about the technicalities of the job. They're not asking about your personality. They're asking about the technicalities. They're asking about maybe your accomplishments or how you solved a problem. Okay. An example of these are behavioral-based questions where they say, tell me about a time where you did this, And you say, okay, well, about 2 years ago, there was a time I was asked to do this particular thing. And so what I did was I did this, and this was the result of it. Things went well. And as a result, the customer was satisfied, and I made the sale, or I signed a contract. I got the customer to sign this contract. And my boss was pleased. And what I learned was that, if you focus on this element of the sales pitch, then that pays off big time later. Something like that. So you answer the question. The problem is that the recruiter might have been expecting you to go into more detail. They want to verify your technical skills when it comes to sales. Okay, so that's what they were asking for. They want to see if you really know your stuff. You say on your resume that you've had a successful career as a salesperson. You've made this, amount of dollar value in sales, or this volume of sales, in different situations. And they want to verify that. Okay, they want to see evidence that, you really know what you're talking about when it comes to sales. So they'll ask you a behavioral-based question. They'll say, tell me about a time when you did this. And you give that answer. Unbeknownst to you, this is why they were asking the question. This is the reason why they wanted to verify that you have the technical, know-how to do the sales. They want to see evidence of that. Now, they haven't explicitly said this to you. They said, give me an example of precisely what you do to make a sale. Okay, think about a sale in your past, an accomplishment. Tell me precisely what you did and why that led to success. They don't ask that question. They say, tell me about a time when you made a big sale and it was a big deal, right? So they don't ask the question that they're wanting the answer to. This is another form of what I would interpret as mind games, because they're asking one question, but they're really wanting the answer to another one. Now, unless you're a mind reader and you could intuitively read the situation or try to imagine yourself in their shoes and think of what they might be looking for at this point in the interview, if you could deduce all of that, then you could maybe give them the answer they were looking for. But unless you can do that, and let's face it, not many people can, you answered the question that they literally asked you. And as a result, they eliminated you. It's this kind of treatment that makes people really frustrated with job interviews and with interviewers, usually recruiters that do this kind of thing. Although hiring managers do it also, depending on the situation. This is something that's, how can I put this? This is very frustrating for people. And it's bad for candidates. It's also bad for employers. And the problem is that for the employers, they're missing on a huge pool of talent, like I've said before. Okay, you are eliminating highly qualified, highly capable candidates on silly assumptions. It's like saying, okay, I'm looking for the best player of a sports, football player, cricket player, whatever. And but before we hire them for our team, we select them and recruit them. We want to have an interview with them. So this candidate might be an amazing sports player. They might be a superstar. Okay, they are gifted. They are highly talented, and you could get them for cheap, considering how valuable they are. Okay, but you say, okay, we're going to have an interview first, and in that interview, you ask them a series of silly, unrelated questions. You say, okay, do this math problem. And then you say, okay, we're going to test your general knowledge. We're going to ask you several questions about world history, geology, sociology, science. Okay. And then let's say you don't pass that interview. They eliminate you based on that. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Now, a lot of people out there, you have experienced all the phenomena I've talked about, okay? You've experienced some of them. Some people might have experienced all of them, okay? You may not have realized that you've experienced some of these also. You might have been eliminated for jobs for one of these reasons or other similar reasons. And the result is the same. The result is that you were not selected for a job that maybe you were the perfect candidate for. When it came to actually doing the job, you would have kicked butt. But because they put you through this process and they assessed you in this way, you were not selected. Now, let's talk about what you can do about this. Okay, now it should be no secret to regular listeners of my podcast and of my viewers of my YouTube channels, The Company's Expert and The Company's Expert 2, my two YouTube channels, that a lot of times I advocate for not going through standard channels to get a job. And when I say standard channels, what I'm referring to is finding a job ad, a job posting, and responding to it with a job application. And then if you're selected for an interview, going to the interviews, which is done officially, and it's done by recruiters in the HR organization, sometimes involving hiring managers and others in the interviews, and then being offered the job after that rigorous selection process. That's what I refer to as standard channels. Now, it is ironic because even though we refer to that as standard channels, that is actually not the way that most people who have jobs get their job. The most popular way that people who have jobs that get their job is through networking. Networking is not standard channels. Networking is basically, I have a personal connection to somebody in the organization. Okay. Now this can be like a sort of long-term friendship or long-term acquaintance, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. In fact, a lot of times it is not done that way. If, for example, you were to just contact a manager who works at a company that has a likelihood of hiring you. Let's say you're a computer programmer, and that company works in the IT industry. They do software development, and so they hire a lot of computer programmers. Okay, a lot of software developers, and you happen to be a software developer. So it's likely that a manager at that organization would be in the position to hire you if they wanted to. They hire a lot of people with your skills. If they wanted to hire you, it's conceivable that they would. There's a good chance that they would. So if you were to reach out to that person, a manager who has the authority to hire people, which is called a hiring manager, if you were to reach out to them and say, hello, I'm a programmer. I love your company. I have skills in the area that you're looking for. And if ever you're looking for someone who has those skills, let me know because I would love to work for you. Okay. Now that's an example of networking. Okay. You're not responding to a job ad. You're having a personal connection with the hiring manager. The hiring manager knows you. Let's say 3 weeks later, the hiring manager, one of their employees has left and they have to replace them. And they think about like, okay, who can I get? And then they remember, hey, just not too long ago, somebody contacted me who seemed nice, who seemed professional, and they said that they had the skills we're looking for, and they were easy to deal with. Maybe I should contact them. They seem to really want to work here, and it might be a fit. Now, if you've done that, if you happen to contact the hiring manager and put out those feelers and say that, here I am and I have this, sooner or later, they will just happen to be looking for someone with your skills right at the time that you show up and say, I have these skills. Now, something you got to remember about that is that the employer would rather hire people this way because every time you post a job, it's expensive, it's time consuming. Think of all the people that have to write the job description and approve it. Think of all the interviews that have to be scheduled, all the telephoning, all the sending emails to set up schedules where everybody can meet and have an interview. The dissemination of information of how to do the interview. Where is it going to be? The interview process, how much of everybody's time that takes up. The recruiters, the hiring managers, all the discussions that happen afterwards as they pare down their pool of candidates to one finalist, and then all the verification, all the reference checks, all the background checks, all of that stuff, and all the paperwork that has to be filled out to create an employee. All of that you could avoid just by saying, look, I'm a hiring manager. I'm just going to talk to this person that contacted me. I say, hey, you want to grab a coffee? Let's go down and get a coffee, or let's set up a video call, or whatever. Well, let's get together in some way, shape, or form. And let me just check out this candidate because, number one, it's cheaper and quicker and easier. Number two, they are the only one knocking on the door that is passionate enough about this job and has demonstrated that they are passionate enough to work here. They're the only ones that have taken the initiative to contact me. They've done all the groundwork to find out who I am. And if you listen to my channel regularly, you'll know that LinkedIn and Google Maps are incredible tools. They can do all this for you. You can find all the employers in your industry around you, and then you can go to LinkedIn and you can find all the individuals in that organization and contact them through LinkedIn. Okay? Of all the people out there I could get, this is the person that has shown the initiative, that has demonstrated their passion to work for me, and also that has demonstrated their professionalism, their communication skills, and their ease of dealing with them. There are not 50 candidates beating down my door that have done that. There's only one. So I'm going to check them out first. If they're not qualified, they're not qualified. But if they are, they get first dibs, because if they would fill the position, they avoid all the expense and all the trouble that I would have normally had to go to. Okay? That's how this stuff works. Now, some people may challenge this and say, well, that's not how things work at larger organizations. First of all, yes, it is. You might have formal HR policies that you have to satisfy. So, okay, if the hiring manager wants to contact this person, they'll say to the person who's contacted them, send me your resume. And they'll give the resume to HR and say, look into this candidate. I'd like to set up an interview with them unless you guys have an objection. You know, that's a lot of times what we see. And then HR will maybe look into you and say, no, bring him in for an interview. I can set up the interview, or you could just do it yourself, either or. Let us know. If there's formal HR policies where everything has to go through that, then they'll say, okay, we'll set up an interview like we would through standard channels. The only difference this time is that the hiring manager is pushing for this interview with this candidate. So keep that in mind. The hiring manager thinks favorably of this candidate, and it's not us recruiting somebody. This is a referral. It's a referral from the hiring manager. That's the difference, and that's the magic of this process. Now, when I've done this stuff, I recommend people go to the highest person they can in an organization, up to and including the CEO. I've been a CEO. There's really no magic there. Two things. Number one, they have the authority. Number two, part of their job, as with all executives, is to be public facing. Okay? Workers don't deal with the public. Supervisors don't deal with the public. Managers, like middle managers, in large part, don't deal with the public. They're all too busy doing their job. Executives, they deal with the public. It is their job, it is part of their job description to solicit, to handle unsolicited requests for information from the public. Occasionally the organization will be contacted by the press, by potential partners, potential vendors, potential customers. Okay, high-level industrial customer, they will contact the executives and say, hey, I got a couple of questions for you. I'd very much like to speak with you. Can we set up a coffee meeting? Now a bad executive will be, no, I don't have time for that. A good executive, as part of their job description, will say, yeah, this looks legitimate. I don't really know exactly what this person wants, but it's my job to investigate it. They could be somebody really important. They could be something that I should deal with that's advantageous to the organization for me to deal with this. Okay, that's the nature of executive jobs. For those of you who have never been executives, that's the nature of the job. Okay, you have responsibility for your particular area, but one of the things that you're expected to do is be public facing and be able to take these things. A lot of times politicians want to talk. Other business leaders want to talk. Competitors sometimes want to talk, right? You can't be defensive and demand all kinds of information before you're even allowed to talk to somebody. That's a turnoff. A lot of important customers have been sent packing by executives doing that, and people know this. Okay, so it is not inappropriate or unheard of for you to send a message to an executive and say, hi, I'm requesting this, or I'd like to talk, or here, I can solve this problem. If ever you're looking for somebody, let me know. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Okay, this happens to executives on a daily basis. They get a wide variety of messages coming in from the public, from the outside business environment, outside their organization, and they have to deal with it. If you ever wondered what executives do, this is a part of it. Okay, so secondly, there's nothing more powerful in, say, a smaller organization or a mid-size organization than for the director of HR to be handed a resume by the CEO and told, look into this candidate. Can we set up an interview? That's very powerful. You won't be dealing with a bunch of idiot recruiters when you do that. All of a sudden, magically, everybody will be happy to talk to you, and they'll be treating you with respect, and they'll be interested in what you have to say. Excuse me. You would think that talking for 41 minutes loudly in a row without a break would be perfectly fine. Apparently it isn't. Anyway, so I go into greater detail about this and a lot of other ways to get a job on my YouTube channel, my main channel, The Company's Expert. I also mention some this and some other topics on my second channel, The Company's Expert 2. And if you are having troubles with your job search, you're not really going anywhere fast, and you're looking for the definitive guide for what to do, how you can take advantage of a lot of these methods to get a job and find ways that work for you, I have a course called Get Hired, and there's a link in the description box of this video. Check it out, as well as many free videos on my YouTube channels that talk about this stuff and how to pass interviews and where to discover jobs and all that kind of stuff. So thank you very much for your attention. You guys are all awesome. If you have experienced a lot of the phenomena that I have described in this episode, my heart goes out to you. It's unjust. It's unfortunate. But the only thing to do is just to keep grinding, okay? If you're going about getting a job through standard channels and you're going to interview after interview and you feel that they're eliminating you with this stuff, okay, it's a numbers game. That's all you got to remember. It's not a reflection on you. They eliminate candidates for the stupidest of reasons, some of which I've mentioned in this video. There are still others. And, it's just random chance whether you get hired or not. And they are extraordinarily bad at spotting talent. And this is evidenced by the fact that employee retention rates are sinking ever lower. People are not sticking around. People are not working out. They make choices and then they discover that those choices are not great in large measure. So if that's you, don't lose heart. It's not a reflection on you. Keep going. You're going to get a job. It's just a numbers game. The more opportunities you have, the more throws of the dice, the more likely you're going to get hired. It's just that simple. And if you've been doing this a while and it's very discouraging, check out some of the alternate ways of getting a job that I can help you with, including networking through my course and my YouTube channels. Thank you very much. Take care. You're awesome. And I'll see you on the next podcast.